The great hall of Thornvale Keep had never smelled so alive. Resin burned in iron braziers along every wall, filling the vaulted stone chamber with a warm amber haze that made the torchlight dance like living things. Banners of a dozen packs hung from the rafters, crimson and gold, deep forest green, the midnight blue of the northern clans, swaying gently in the draught that crept beneath the ancient oak doors. Long tables of dark timber groaned under the weight of roasted pheasant, salted boar, honeyed bread, and clay pitchers of deep red wine. The stone floor had been swept clean and strewn with dried lavender and pine, so that every footstep released a whisper of fragrance into the air, already thick with wood smoke and the natural warm scent of wolves gathered in number. It was the night of claiming, the most sacred social ritual in the kingdom of Ashbourne, held once every generation at the seat of the ruling pack. On this night, alphas of standing declared their chosen mates before their kin and before the court. It was the night promises became bonds. The night hope became real. Daisy stood at the threshold of that great hall and allowed herself, just for one breath, to believe. She was 23 years old, the daughter of a seamstress who had died the previous winter, and a father no one in the village of Greywood spoke of anymore. She held no title, no land, no bloodline that any noble wolf would bother to recite. What she had was a steadiness in her gray-blue eyes that unnerved people who expected her to be afraid, and a long golden braid that fell over one shoulder, neat and deliberate, the way her mother had taught her to keep it when she wanted to look her best. Tonight, she had tried to look her best. The dress had taken her 3 months. She had sewn it herself by candlelight after long days of work in the keep's lower kitchens, where she helped the head cook in exchange for lodging during the weeks before the gathering. The fabric was a soft dove-gray linen she had traded 2 silver pieces for at the market in Greywood, nearly everything she had saved. The hem was embroidered with tiny winter blooms in white thread, each one stitched so carefully that her fingers had bled on the needle more times than she could count. It was not a gown fit for a noblewoman, but it was hers, made with her own hands and her own hope. And when she had looked at her reflection in the still water of the basin that morning, she had thought it was beautiful. She still thought so. She walked into the hall with her chin level and her hands still. Her name had been spoken by Lord Cedric Vane 4 months ago in the open square of Greywood Village, in front of his Pax Beta and 2 witnesses. He had said the words clearly. "I will speak your name at the claiming. Among wolves." Those words were not casual. They were the architecture of a promise. His Beta had heard it. The village elder had heard it. Daisy had heard it and carried the weight of it every day since, like something precious, she was afraid to hold too tightly. Cedric was the 3rd son of Lord Edric Vane, Alpha of the Greywood Pack, not the most powerful lineage in Ashbourne, but a respectable one. He was handsome in a clean, uncomplicated way, with sandy hair and easy manners, and he had pursued Daisy with persistence that felt, at the time, like sincerity. She had not been naive. She had waited and watched, and only allowed herself to hope once the words were spoken in front of witnesses. She crossed the hall now, moving toward the space near the Greywood banner where she had been told to wait. Several wolves turned to look at her as she passed, some with curiosity, some with the particular blankness of people who had already decided she did not belong. She met none of their eyes directly, but she did not lower her gaze to the floor either. She had learned long ago that there was a difference between humility and surrender. Her friend Petra found her before she reached the banner. Petra was a beta from Greywood, square-shouldered and warm, with dark eyes that missed very little. She had known Daisy since childhood, had been there when Daisy's mother was buried, and was one of perhaps 4 people in the world whose opinion Daisy trusted without reservation. "You look lovely," Petra said, and she meant it. Daisy could always tell. "Cedric arrived an hour ago. His mother is here." Something shifted in Daisy's chest. His mother. Lady Vane. She brought the eldest daughter of Lord Harwick's pack with her. Petra's voice was careful, measured. They arrived together. Daisy said nothing for a moment. She studied the banner above them, the grey wolf of Greywood stitched in silver thread against a field of deep green. "That means nothing necessarily," she said at last. "Alliances between packs are common at a claiming." Petra looked at her with the expression of someone who loved another person too much to lie and too much to say the truth plainly. "Of course," she said. The ceremony began at the second toll of the keep's iron bell. The High Lord Steward, an elderly beta with a voice that carried to every corner of stone, called the alphas forward one by one to make their declarations. The crowd tightened around the central floor, and the air grew warmer with the press of bodies and the collective anticipation that made wolves restless and alert in a gathering. Daisy watched from her place near the Greywood banner. She watched 2 alphas declare their mates with confidence and ceremony. The chosen women stepping forward to stand beside them while the hall witnessed and the bonds were recognized. She watched the pleasure on those women's faces. Not the wild joy of surprise, but the deep settling relief of a promise kept. And she understood it completely. When the steward called Cedric's name, Daisy straightened. Her hands remained still at her sides. She had practiced this, the moment of stepping forward, the walk across the open floor, the way she would stand beside him with her head level and her heart full. She had practiced it so many times in the quiet of the kitchen stores that the movement lived in her body like memory. Cedric walked to the center of the floor. He was well dressed in a deep green tunic and a Vane family cloak, his sandy hair combed back from his face. He looked, Daisy thought, like a man who had already made a decision. And the decision was not what she had been told. He cleared his throat and turned not toward the Greywood banner, not toward Daisy, but toward the cluster of nobles gathered on the eastern side of the hall where Lady Vane stood with the Harwick delegation. His voice was steady, almost rehearsed. "Before this gathering and before the packs of Ashbourne," he said, "I declare my chosen mate." He paused. "Lady Rowan Harwick, of the Harwick pack." A murmur moved through the crowd like wind across water. Daisy did not move. She stood exactly where she had been standing, one hand resting at her side, the other curved slightly at her waist. The embroidered hem of her gray dress touched the stone floor. The lavender beneath her feet released its scent when the woman beside her shifted. Everything in that hall continued as if nothing had broken. The torches still burned. The wine still sat in the pitchers. The steward continued in his slow, ceremonial voice. Only Petra looked at her. And Petra said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Daisy breathed in slowly through her nose. She breathed out. The humiliation was enormous. Not because she had loved Cedric deeply, though she had cared for him with sincerity, but because he had spoken her name in a square in front of witnesses and chosen this moment, this public and torchlit and attended moment, to erase it. Every wolf in this hall who had heard the whispers of his promise to her now watched to see what she would do. She would not weep. She would not call out his name. She would not stand at the Greywood banner like a forgotten object left behind after a journey. She turned, collected the skirt of her gray dress in one hand so the hem would not drag, and began to walk toward the outer corridor, toward the carved archway that led away from the hall, away from the warmth and the wine and the torchlight. Her footsteps were even. Her chin was level. She kept her eyes on the archway ahead of her, as if it were the only thing in the room that mattered. She was 12 paces from it when she heard the doors on the opposite end of the hall open. Not the side doors, not the servants' passage. The great doors, the main entrance of Thornvale Keep, swung inward on their ancient iron hinges with a sound like a held breath released. The hall did not fall silent. It fell still. There is a difference. Silence is the absence of sound. Stillness is the presence of something too significant to speak over. 3 men entered the hall. Even from across the length of the chamber, with the crowd parting before them like water before stone. The quality of their presence was unmistakable. Wolves of lower rank felt it in their instincts before they understood it with their minds. They stepped aside without being asked. The first was broad and golden-haired, scanning the hall with sharp amber eyes and a half-smile that suggested he found most situations faintly entertaining. The second moved with a particular fluid ease, dark-eyed and watchful, the kind of man who catalogued exits and faces simultaneously without appearing to do so. Between them, slightly ahead in the way that the most dominant wolf is always slightly ahead without meaning to be, walked the third. He was tall, with long black hair braided back from a strong face, pale blue eyes that held no warmth and no coldness either, only attention. He wore dark leather armor over broad shoulders and a black fur mantle, and he moved through the crowded hall, the way a river moves through a gorge, without hurry, without question, with the absolute certainty that the terrain would accommodate him. Daisy stopped walking, not because she recognized him, though she knew who he was in the same distant way she knew the name of the moon. Every wolf in Ashbourne knew the name of Adrian Caelmore, High King of the Northern Reaches, Alpha of Alphas, the man who had ended the Borderland War with 7 days of campaign that older wolves still spoke about in lowered voices. She stopped because his pale blue eyes, moving across the hall with that calm, cataloging attention, found her face, and stayed. The moment lasted only a few seconds. Then Adrian Caelmore's gaze moved on, and the hall resumed its breath. But Daisy had felt it, the particular weight of being truly seen by someone whose attention meant something. It was different from being watched. Half the room had watched her walk toward the exit with the careful, sideways observation of people pretending not to stare. That was the gaze of wolves tracking a wounded animal, calculating whether it would recover or fall. What she had felt in those 2 or 3 seconds was something else entirely. Attention without pity. Recognition without context. As if he had looked at her face and filed it away under a category she did not yet have a name for. She told herself it meant nothing, and continued walking. The corridor beyond the archway was cool and dim, lit only by a pair of oil lamps set into iron brackets on the stone walls. The noise of the hall became muffled behind her. Voices, the clink of cups, the low ceremonial drone of the steward's voice as the claiming continued without her. She pressed her back against the cold stone of the corridor wall and allowed herself finally one long, unsteady breath. Her hands were shaking. She had not noticed until now. She pressed them flat against the rough stone and held them there until the trembling stopped. The embroidered hem of her gray dress lay still against the floor. All those evenings with the needle, all that careful white thread tracing winter blooms across the fabric, and she had walked across that hall in this dress for nothing. Not for Cedric, as it turned out, because Cedric had never intended to keep his word. She had made this dress for herself, for the version of tonight she had believed in. She decided, standing in that corridor, that she would not let that belief become something to be ashamed of. She had hoped, honestly. That was not foolishness. It was dignity of a different kind. She heard footsteps and straightened before she had finished the thought. The golden-haired man from the entrance, the broad one with the amber eyes and the entertained expression, appeared in the archway. He looked at her with unguarded interest, leaning one shoulder against the stone frame as if he had all the time in the world and intended to use it. "That was a remarkable exit," he said. His voice was easy, low, touched with the accent of the far western packs. Most people who walk out of a claiming look like they are fleeing. You walked like you were choosing to leave. Daisy looked at him steadily. I was choosing to leave. His smile widened slightly. I noticed. He straightened from the wall and offered a brief, formal inclination of his head. The greeting of an alpha, acknowledging an equal, which was not the greeting she had expected from a man of obvious rank, addressing a woman with no title and flower-rough hands. "Lord Adrian Caelmore, the king's younger brother, the entertaining one, before you ask." I was not going to ask. "No, you weren't." He studied her with that amber gaze, openly curious. "You're the girl Vane made the promise to." It was not a question, and she did not treat it as one. "I am Daisy of Greywood." "Greywood." He tilted his head. "No pack name." "No pack." He was quiet for a moment, which surprised her. She had expected more performance from him. He wore charm the way some men wore armor, as a first and functional layer. But beneath it, she sensed something more thoughtful. He was reading her the way wolves read terrain before committing to a path. "What will you do?" he asked, not unkindly. "Return to Greywood in the morning," she said. "Resume my work. And tonight? Survive it with some dignity, as I appear to be doing." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, not the social laugh of a man at a banquet, but a genuine sound, brief and surprised, as if she had managed to catch him off guard. "I think," he said, "that my brother should meet you." Before she could respond to that, before she could decide how to feel about it or what it meant, the second man appeared behind Brennan. The dark-eyed one, lean and deliberate in his movements, with the watchful quality of someone who had spent years reading rooms and people. He wore the silver badge of the king's personal guard on his cloak, and he looked at Daisy with the focused, assessing expression of a man whose entire profession was the evaluation of risk. "Lord Commander Edane," he said, introducing himself with military economy. "You are Daisy of Greywood." "So I have just been explaining," she said. Edane glanced at Brennan. Something passed between them. Not quite a look of concern, but the communication of two men who had served the same person long enough to anticipate each other's thoughts. Then, Edane returned his gaze to Daisy and said quietly, and with great precision, "His Majesty requests your presence." The corridor was very still. Somewhere in the hall beyond, a cup struck a table and laughter rose and settled. The oil lamps threw long shadows against the ancient stone. Daisy looked at Edane. She looked at Brennan. She thought about the pale blue eyes that had found her face in a crowded hall for 3 seconds and moved on. She thought about Cedric Vane standing in the center of that floor, speaking a different woman's name. She thought about the dress she had spent 3 months sewing by candlelight, and the 2 silver pieces she had traded for the fabric. "Very well," she said. They led her not back through the great hall, but through a side passage she had not known existed. A narrow corridor behind the main chamber, stone-floored and low-ceilinged, that ran along the outside of the hall before opening into a smaller receiving room. This space was lit by a single iron chandelier, hung with a dozen candles, and it smelled of old wood and the particular cold that lived in stone structures no matter the season. There were no banners here, no ceremony. A pair of heavy chairs sat near a carved fireplace where a modest fire burned. A table held a clay pitcher and 2 cups. Adrian Caelmore stood at the room's single narrow window, looking out at the dark courtyard below. He did not turn immediately when they entered. When he did, it was with the unhurried movement of a man who had never once felt the need to perform urgency. Up close, he was more formidable than distance suggested. He stood a full head taller than Brennan, which was considerable. The braided black hair was thick and neat, pulled back from a face that was all strong lines, jaw, brow, the straight bridge of his nose, and those pale blue eyes held the same quality she had noticed across the hall. Not warmth, exactly, but a completeness of attention that made the rest of the room feel peripheral. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the hall. No pity, just that steady, cataloging gaze. "Sit," he said. Not an order exactly. The word had the texture of something that assumed compliance as a natural outcome rather than demanding it. Daisy sat, She folded her hands in her lap and met his gaze without difficulty. She had been looked at with contempt and indifference enough times that the focused attention of a powerful man did not rearrange her composure. He sat in the opposite chair and studied her for a moment before speaking. "You are Daisy of Greywood. Your brother and your Lord Commander have both confirmed this already." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. "You are not frightened of me." "Should I be?" He considered the question seriously, which she had not expected. "Most people are," he said at last. "I have had a difficult evening," she said. "Fear requires a kind of energy I have already spent." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Vane made you a promise in front of witnesses." "He did. And broke it tonight, publicly, in the claiming hall." His voice held no particular emotion, no outrage on her behalf, no cold judgment of Cedric. He was simply naming what had occurred, the way a general names the position of an enemy force, as fact, for the purpose of moving forward. "Yes," she said. "Why did you not protest it?" Daisy looked at him steadily. "Because I will not beg anyone for what they promised willingly. That is not something I owe him, or anyone else." The fire in the small hearth snapped. A log shifted and sent up a brief scatter of sparks. Adrian Caelmore watched her face in the firelight and said nothing for a long enough moment that the silence became its own kind of presence in the room. "I have been attending claimings in this kingdom for 12 years, he said at last. "In that time I have seen women weep, plead, rage, and collapse when a promise was broken before the court. I have never seen one turn and walk out of the hall as if the room had simply ceased to interest her." Daisy said nothing. "When I came through those doors," Adrian said, "you were the first person I saw. Not because you were standing near the entrance. You were 40 feet away, moving toward the corridor." He paused. "I want to know what I am smelling." It was a strange thing to say, blunt in the way that only very powerful wolves allowed themselves to be blunt. Daisy understood what he meant. A wolf's scent was information, and what a dominant wolf could read from it was far beyond what any lower rank perceived. She had been told before, vaguely and without explanation, that her scent was unusual. An older wolf in Greywood had told her once that it reminded him of something he could not name, something old. She had never understood what he meant. "I do not know what you are smelling," she said honestly. "No," Adrian said, as if she had confirmed something. "You would not." He rose from the chair with that same unhurried movement, went to the table, and poured a cup of water from the clay pitcher. He set it on the arm of her chair without being asked, and returned to his own seat. "There is a scholar of lineage in my court, a very old beta who has spent his life reading bloodlines the way other men read maps." Daisy looked at the cup of water on the arm of her chair and then at him. "You think I have a bloodline worth reading?" "I think," Adrian said carefully, "that something in your blood is very old and very quiet. And I have learned not to ignore quiet things." The fire burned. The candles in the chandelier above threw warm light across the stone walls. Somewhere beyond the narrow window, the dark courtyard of Thornvale Keep held the night, and the forest beyond the walls held the cold, and the cold held everything else. Daisy picked up the cup and drank. Her hands were no longer shaking. Petra found her just before dawn. Daisy had been given a guest chamber, a real one, not the small storage room beside the kitchens where she had been sleeping since her arrival at Thornvale Keep. This room had a proper bed with a wool blanket and a narrow window that looked out over the eastern courtyard, where the first pale light was beginning to separate the sky from the tree line. Someone had left a clay bowl of warm water and a folded cloth on the small table near the door. She did not know who, and she had decided not to think too carefully about it. She had not slept. When Petra slipped through the door, Daisy had left it unlatched, knowing she would come. Her friend stood in the threshold for a moment, taking in the room with wide, dark eyes, before closing the door softly behind her. "They gave you this room," Petra said. "It appears so." Petra sat on the edge of the bed and looked at Daisy, who was standing at the narrow window watching the courtyard lighten. "The whole hall is talking," she said. "You left, the king arrived, you were seen being escorted by Lord Brennan and Lord Commander Edane into the western passage." She paused. Cedric's mother looked as though she had swallowed something unpleasant. Daisy said nothing, though something small and honest inside her noted that this information was not entirely unwelcome. "What happened?" Petra asked. "In that room. What did he say to you?" Daisy turned from the window. She sat in the chair near the table and folded her hands the way she always did when she was ordering her thoughts carefully. "He said he noticed something in my scent, something old." She met Petra's eyes. "He has a scholar of lineage in his court. He intends to have him read my bloodline." Petra was quiet for a long moment. Her dark eyes moved over Daisy's face, with the thoroughness of someone who had known her since childhood, and could read the difference between her calm moods and her frightened ones. "And what do you think of that?" "I think it is strange," Daisy said. "My mother was a seamstress. My father—" She paused. Her father was a subject that had always existed in her life as an absence rather than a presence. A name her mother would not speak. A space in conversations that closed over itself whenever she approached it. My mother never spoke of his bloodline. She said it did not matter, that it was dangerous to speak of. Petra's expression shifted. She said dangerous. She said it once. I was perhaps 9 years old. I asked her about my father, the way children do, and she said the name was not safe to carry openly. Daisy shook her head slightly. I thought it was grief speaking. She loved him, I think, in the way that leaves a mark that never fully heals. I never pressed her. The courtyard below was brightening steadily. A pair of stable hands crossed the open ground with a barrow of feed, their breath visible in the cold morning air. The keep was waking slowly, carefully, the way large things always woke, with great weight and little hurry. "The king did not frighten you," Petra said. It was not a question. "No. Everyone is frightened of him. So he told me." Daisy looked at her hands. "He is very direct. He says exactly what he means and expects the same. I found that easier than I expected." She paused, then added with the small, dry precision that Petra recognized as her closest equivalent to humor. "He also brought me water without being asked. That is more consideration than most people have shown me in recent memory." Petra pressed her lips together in the expression she wore when she was trying not to smile, because the situation was also serious. Then she said, "Daisy, the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches has taken an interest in you. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand that it means something. I am still determining what." "It means Cedric Vane has made the worst decision of his life," Petra said plainly, "and that your life is about to become something entirely different from what it was yesterday morning." Daisy looked at the narrow window for a moment. The light was fully gold now, the sun having crested the tree line beyond the keep's outer wall. She thought about yesterday morning, waking in the kitchen storeroom before anyone else, dressing in her gray gown by the light of a single tallow candle, braiding her hair with hands that had been nervous but steady, telling herself that tonight was the beginning of something. She had been right about that. Only the shape of the beginning had been entirely wrong. "I know," she said. "The scholar of lineage was called Master Owain. He was very old in the way that certain wolves aged, slowly and with great dignity, so that his face held the quality of carved oak rather than simple wrinkling. His eyes were dark brown and sharp and missed nothing. He had arrived at Thornvale Keep as part of the king's retinue and received Daisy in a small study off the main corridor, where he had spread several large sheets of parchment across a reading table and set 3 candles at precise intervals to light them. The candles were unnecessary now that the morning sun came through the high window, but he had not moved them. Adrian was present, standing near the room's far wall with his arms folded. He did not speak. He watched. Brennan was in the doorway, because Brennan appeared to be the kind of man who situated himself in doorways when he wanted to observe proceedings without committing to them fully. Master Owain took Daisy's hand without ceremony and examined her palm for a long time. Not the lines, but the scent, pressing his nose briefly to the inside of her wrist in the way that very old wolves read information from skin, the way younger ones rarely had the patience or skill to do. She held still and let him. He made a low sound, not alarm, not surprise, but something closer to the deep satisfaction of a man who has searched a long time for a specific passage in a long book and has finally found it. "Tell me your mother's name," he said. "Marin. Marin of Greywood." "And her mother's name?" Daisy hesitated. "Scylla. I knew her very briefly. She died when I was small." "Scylla." Master Owain released her hand and turned to his parchments, tracing a line with one bent finger across a page so covered in names and connecting marks that it resembled a river system viewed from a great height. "Scylla." "Yes." He moved his finger to the right, following a line that crossed 2 others and connected to a name at the page's upper margin. "Scylla, born of the Ashvale line." He looked up at Daisy. The Ashvale were the founding bloodline of the First Eastern Pack. They held the Thornwood territories for 6 generations before the line was believed to have ended. The room was very quiet. "Believed," Adrian said. He had not moved from the wall. His voice was the same, measured, precise. But there was something beneath it now, a tension sharpening further, the way a very still predator becomes stiller before it acts. "The last recorded Ashvale female died without recorded heirs," Master Owain said. "However, it was known that she had a daughter by a union that was never formally recognized. The father was of a rival bloodline. The union was considered dangerous to both families, and the child was hidden." He looked at Daisy steadily. "That child was Scylla, your grandmother." Daisy sat very still in her chair. "The Ashvale bloodline carries a particular quality," Master Owain continued. "Those who know what to smell for recognize it immediately. It is described in the old records as," he glanced at the parchment, "the scent of deep forest after rain, with an undertone of burning cedar and old stone, a marker of the founding blood." He looked at Adrian. "It is precisely what your Majesty sent me to examine." Adrian pushed off from the wall and moved to the table. He looked at the parchment. Not long. Just enough to confirm the names and the connecting lines. And then he looked at Daisy. "You are the last living descendant of the Ashvale founding line," he said. Daisy thought about her mother, sewing in the candlelight of their small house in Greywood. She thought about the word dangerous, spoken once, quietly, and never again. She thought about a grandmother she had barely known, a woman called Scylla who had apparently carried an ancient and hidden thing in her blood and passed it down without explanation. "The Thornwood territories," she said. Her voice was steady. "That is the land to the east of Greywood, the old forest." "Yes," Master Owain said. "I walked through that forest as a child," Daisy said, almost to herself. "My mother used to say I smelled like I belonged there." She paused. I thought she was being poetic. Brennan made a sound from the doorway, something caught between a quiet laugh and genuine feeling. He covered it with a cough when Adrian looked at him. Adrian pulled out the chair across from Daisy and sat. He rested his forearms on the table and looked at her with that pale, complete attention. "Do you understand what this means?" he said. And it was not quite a question. "It means I am not who I thought I was." She met his gaze. Or rather, I am exactly who I was. The world simply did not know it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The Thornwood territories have been held in trust by the Crown since the Ashvale line was believed extinct. By the law of founding blood, a living Ashvale heir has the right to petition for restoration of the ancestral claim." He paused. "I am the Crown." Daisy held his gaze. "You are telling me that you have been holding my family's land." "I am telling you," he said, "that it has been waiting." The candles burned. The parchment lay between them on the table, covered in the names of people she had never known who had nonetheless made her. Master Owain quietly rolled a second document and set it to one side. Brennan, in the doorway, was uncharacteristically silent. Outside the window, the wind came through the thornwood trees at the edge of the keep's outer wall and carried with it the smell of deep forest after rain, of cedar and old stone. Daisy had smelled it her entire life and never known its name. She knew it now. "What do you want from me?" she asked Adrian directly. She had already learned that he preferred directness, and she found that she did too. He did not look away. "I want to understand why a founding bloodline was hidden for 3 generations," he said. "I want to know what was dangerous enough that your grandmother concealed her own name." He paused. "And I want to know if you are willing to stop hiding it." The question settled in the room like the first stone dropped in still water. The impact brief, the ring spreading outward in every direction, reaching further than anyone standing at the shore could yet see. Daisy thought of Cedric Vane in the center of the claiming hall, saying a different name. She thought of herself walking out of that hall in a gray dress embroidered with winter blooms. Head level, hands still, choosing dignity over collapse. She thought, perhaps that was not the end of something. Perhaps that was the last moment of the old life, making room. "Yes," she said. "I am willing." The news moved through Thornvale Keep the Way. All significant news moved through enclosed spaces full of wolves. Quickly, incompletely, and with considerable embellishment by the time it reached the outer corridors. By mid-morning, the version circulating among the lower servants was that the king had discovered a hidden queen in the kitchens. By the time it reached the noble delegates still gathered for the tail end of the claiming festivities, it had become something closer to the truth, though no less extraordinary for it. The woman Cedric Vane had publicly dismissed the night before was the last living heir of the Ashvale founding bloodline, and the Alpha King had received her formally in his private study and kept his court scholar with her for the better part of 2 hours. Cedric Vane heard the news while still at the breakfast table. Petra, who had positioned herself with considerable strategic skill near the Greywood delegation's corner of the Great Hall, reported later that he had gone very still when Lord Commander Edain's voice carried the information across the room during a routine address to the assembled packs. Still, and then pale, and then the particular color of a man who is understood, all at once, and too late, the full dimension of what he has discarded. His mother had said nothing. She had set down her cup with great precision and looked at the tablecloth. Daisy was not in the hall when any of this occurred. She was walking. Adrian had suggested it. Not suggested exactly, but indicated in the way he indicated most things, with a calm directness that left room for refusal, without making refusal feel necessary. He had said that the Thornwood's eastern edge ran along the keep's outer wall, and that if she had not seen it properly, she should. Brennan had offered to accompany her. Adrian had overruled this with a single quiet look, and then said he would come himself, which had surprised Brennan visibly, and Edain not at all. So they walked, the Alpha King of the Northern Reaches and the seamstress's daughter from Greywood, along the frost-edged path that followed the keep's outer wall where it met the first line of trees. The Thornwood was ancient, the kind of forest that felt older than the structures built beside it, the kind whose silence had texture. The trees were vast and dark-barked, their upper branches bare against the winter sky, their roots breaking through the frozen earth like the fingers of something enormous and patient that lived beneath. The smell was exactly what the old records had described: rain and cedar and stone. Daisy walked with her gray cloak pulled close and her golden braid over one shoulder, and said very little for a long while. Adrian walked beside her at an easy pace, his black fur mantle catching the cold wind, his pale eyes moving over the tree line with the quiet attention he gave to everything. "Did you know before last night," she asked eventually, "that there might be a living Ashvale heir? Master Owain told me 3 months ago that the bloodline might not be fully extinct," Adrian said. He had found a notation in an old record, a birth registered under a false name in a village called Greywood. He was not certain. He asked me to bring him to the claiming gathering, where wolves from that region would be present. A pause. Scent is more reliable than written record. Daisy considered this. "You came here looking." "I came here for the claiming. The looking was secondary." He glanced at her, though it became primary quickly. She looked at the tree line. A crow moved through the upper branches of the nearest oak and was gone. "The union that was hidden," she said. "My grandmother's, the rival bloodline. Do you know who it was?" Adrian was quiet for a moment. "Master Owain has a theory. He has not confirmed it yet." "Tell me the theory." He looked at her with that steady, measuring gaze. She had noticed that he did this, weighed not just what to say, but whether the person asking was ready to carry the answer, and then trusted his assessment and spoke plainly. "He believes the father of your grandmother's child was of the Caelmore line," he said. "A younger son of the old northern king, 3 generations past. The union would have been considered politically catastrophic. The Ashvale and Caelmore bloodlines were in open territorial conflict at that time. Both families would have had reason to bury it." Daisy stopped walking. The wind came through the thornwood and moved the hem of her gray cloak and stirred the loose strands of hair at her temple. She stood at the edge of the frost-covered path and processed what he had just told her with the careful, unhurried thoroughness that was the most consistent thing about her. "You and I," she said slowly, "may share a bloodline. Distantly, 4 generations removed, if the theory is correct." He had stopped when she stopped, and stood now facing her, close enough that she was aware of the warmth that came off him despite the cold. The particular heat of a large dominant wolf, the kind that was physical fact rather than metaphor. "It would explain why your scent reached me across a crowded hall." "It would explain many things," Daisy said. "Yes." She looked at him directly. She had been doing this from the beginning, meeting his gaze without the slight downward deflection that lower-rank wolves gave a king almost involuntarily, without even noticing they were doing it. He had noticed that she did not do it. She could tell. "Is that why you brought me here? To the path, to the study, to this conversation? Because of bloodline?" He was quiet for long enough that the crow returned to the oak above them and made one short sound before leaving again. "No," he said. She waited. "I brought you to the study because of what Master Owain needed to examine," he said. "I brought you to this path because I wanted to see what you did when you stood beside the thornwood for the first time knowing it was yours." He paused. "I did not bring you anywhere for bloodline. Bloodline is record. It explains scent. It does not explain the rest." "The rest," she repeated. "The way you walked out of that hall," he said. "That is not something a bloodline produces. That is something a person decides." Daisy held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned and looked at the thornwood, at the ancient trees and the frost on the roots, and the dark bark that smelled of cedar and rain and everything her mother had always told her she smelled like. She thought about 3 generations of hidden names. A grandmother who had buried her own identity to survive. A mother who had kept one dangerous word, just one, and trusted her daughter to live without the rest of it. "My mother knew," Daisy said. It was not a question. She would have known something, Adrian said. Perhaps not all of it, but enough to be careful. She was always careful. Daisy's voice was even, but something moved behind it. Not grief exactly, more like the recognition of grief that has already been processed and settled. She kept us small and quiet and unremarkable. I used to think she was afraid of the world. She was quiet for a moment. She was protecting the bloodline. Protecting me. Yes, Adrian said, simply and without elaboration, because it did not need any. They stood together at the edge of the old forest for a little while. The wind moved through the branches. The cold was sharp and clean. Then Adrian said, "The restoration of your ancestral claim requires a formal petition before the gathered packs. I would like to convene it this afternoon, before the delegations disperse." Daisy turned to look at him. "Today." "The packs are still assembled. Once they scatter to their territories, reconvening them is a matter of months." He met her eyes. "I will not force this. The petition is yours to make or not make. But I want you to know that I will stand witness to it, and that my standing witness to it is not a neutral act." She understood what he meant. The Alpha King standing witness to a petition of restoration did not merely observe it. He guaranteed it. His presence transformed the proceeding from a request into a declaration. No packlord in that hall would challenge a restoration witnessed by Adrian Caelmore. "Why?" she asked. Not suspiciously. She had moved past suspicion somewhere in the corridor the night before, when he had brought her water without being asked. She asked because she wanted the honest answer, and because she had learned in the past 12 hours that he would give it. He looked at her for a long, still moment. When he spoke, his voice was the same as always, measured, direct. But beneath it, something had shifted, the way the quality of light shifts when a cloud moves and the sun reaches what was shadowed. "Because the right thing was hidden for 3 generations, he said. "And I am tired of watching the wrong things go unchallenged in my kingdom." He paused. "And because you walked out of that hall in a dress you made yourself and did not look back. And I have been watching people make choices in this kingdom for 12 years, and I know the difference between a person who survives difficulty and a person who is built from it." Daisy said nothing for a moment. The wind came again, and the thornwood exhaled its ancient smell around them both. "I will make the petition," she said. The great hall of Thornvale Keep looked different in the afternoon light. The breakfast had been cleared. The long tables had been pushed to the walls. The delegations of the various packs stood in their clusters, Greywood green, Harwick gold, the deep blue of the northern kin, the burgundy of the Westfall wolves, and watched the open floor at the hall's center with the taut attention of wolves who had understood from the summons that something significant was about to happen, and were still calculating what. Daisy stood at the entrance to the hall wearing the same gray dress with its embroidered winter blooms. She had rebraided her golden hair and straightened her cloak, and she was, by any observable measure, the same woman who had walked out of this room the night before, except that she knew her name now. All of it. Master Owain stood to one side of the central floor with his parchment. Lord Commander Edain stood to the other. Brennan had taken a position slightly behind and to the right of the king's seat, the large carved chair at the hall's head that Adrian now occupied, sitting with the particular stillness of a man who was completely comfortable with the weight of every eye in the room. Cedric Vane stood with the Greywood delegation. He was watching the entrance. When Daisy walked through it, he went very still in the way Petra had described at breakfast. Total and belated comprehension arriving all at once, too late to do anything with. She did not look at him. She walked to the center of the floor. Master Owain read the lineage from his parchment. The Ashvale founding line, the hidden birth, the 3 generations of concealed name, and the identification confirmed by scent and record both. His voice was dry and precise, and carried the authority of a man who had spent his entire long life ensuring that truth was documented accurately so that it could be retrieved when needed. When he finished, Adrian rose from the carved chair. The hall was absolutely still. "By the law of founding blood and by the authority of the Northern Crown," he said, and his voice filled the stone chamber without effort, the voice of a man whose authority was not performed but simply present. "I stand witness to the restoration of the Ashvale claim. Daisy of Greywood is recognized before these pacts as the rightful heir of the Ashvale founding line and lawful claimant of the Thornwood territories held in trust by the Crown." He looked at her across the open floor. Something in that look was not ceremonial. "The claim is restored," he said. "Let it be witnessed." The gathered wolves responded the way packs always responded to a declaration witnessed by their king. Not with argument, but with the collective settling of a thing accepted, a truth recognized and filed into the understanding of everyone present. Pack lords inclined their heads. Voices rose briefly, and then quieted. Somewhere in the Greywood delegation, Lady Vane made a very small sound. Daisy stood in the center of the hall in her gray dress, with its winter blooms, and felt the weight of 3 generations of hidden names lift off a bloodline that had been carrying it in silence for longer than she had been alive. She did not weep, but it was a near thing, and she thought her mother would have understood that completely. 3 days passed before the delegations left Thornvale Keep. In those 3 days, the world Daisy had inhabited for 23 years rearranged itself around her with the quiet, inexorable thoroughness of a river changing course, not violently, but permanently, so that when you looked back, you could see the old channel and understand that it would never carry water again. The Thornwood territories were formally transferred from Crown Trust to Ashvale Claim on the morning of the 2nd day, documented by Master Owain in his precise hand on good vellum and sealed with the Northern Crown's mark. Daisy held the document and read every word of it twice. The language was old and formal and made her head ache slightly, but she read it until she understood it, because she had always believed that you should understand completely the things that belonged to you. Petra wept when Daisy showed her. Petra had strong opinions about not weeping in front of people, and usually managed it successfully. But this defeated her, and she cried with the unself-conscious fullness of someone who had watched a person she loved be overlooked and diminished for years, and was now witnessing the correction of a long injustice. Daisy held her hand and let her, and said nothing, because some moments did not need words layered over them. The Greywood delegation prepared to depart on the morning of the 3rd day. Cedric Vane came to find Daisy before they left. She had expected this, or something like it, and so she was not surprised when she turned from the window of her chamber and found him standing in the open doorway. He looked the way men look when they have spent several nights arriving at a reckoning they did not choose and cannot avoid. Tired, and honest in the way that only exhaustion allows. "Daisy," he said. "Lord Vane," she said. She kept her voice even. She felt no cruelty toward him, which surprised her slightly. She had expected anger to be waiting there beneath the composure, something hot and pointed. What she found instead was a clean, uncomplicated distance. The feeling of standing on a far bank and looking back at a crossing you had already made. He looked at the room, the proper bed, the good candles, the document on the table, and then at her. "I did not know," he said. "No," she agreed. "You did not." "If I had, it would not have mattered," she said, not unkindly. "What you did was not a mistake of information. You knew who I was. You made a promise to that person, and when your mother arrived with a more convenient choice, you broke it." She paused. "The bloodline changes what I am owed by this kingdom. It does not change what you owed me as a man who gave his word." He was quiet for a long moment. The honesty of the exhausted remained on his face. No argument, no deflection. Just a man looking at the full shape of what he had done, and finding it smaller and worse than he had understood it to be when he did it. "I am sorry," he said. and she believed him, which was perhaps the most complete form of the thing. Not forgiveness, exactly, but the recognition that an apology was real, and that real apologies deserved to be received honestly. "I know," she said. "Safe travels, Lord Vane." He left. She turned back to the window. Outside, the thornwood stood at the edge of the keep's wall, dark and patient, and entirely indifferent to the small human reckonings happening in the stone rooms beside it. She found that she liked it for that. Adrian came to find her that evening. He did not send Brennan or Edane. He came himself, which she had come to understand was his way of indicating that something mattered to him. Not with words, not with ceremony, but with the simple, direct act of being present. He knocked once, which she also understood, because a man who simply assumed entry was a different man entirely from the one she had been watching for 3 days. "Come in," she said. He entered and stood near the door with his black fur mantle and his braided hair and his pale eyes that went to her face immediately and stayed. "The last of the delegations departs tomorrow morning," he said. "Thornvale Keep will be quiet by midday." "Yes," she said. "I return to the Northern Court in 4 days." He paused. "I would like you to come." Daisy looked at him steadily. This was the thing she had known was coming, had felt approaching with the same certainty you feel a change in weather before it arrives. She had spent the past day turning it over carefully in her mind, examining it from every angle, the way she examined difficult needlework before committing the thread. "Tell me what that means," she said, plainly. He came further into the room and sat in the chair near the table, the same posture as the small receiving room 3 days ago, forearms resting, attention complete. "It means that the Thornwood territories need stewardship. They have been held in trust for 3 generations and require a lord or a lady who knows them." He paused. "It also means that I have spoken with you for 3 days and find that I would like to continue doing so for considerably longer than 3 days." "Those are 2 separate things," she said. "They are," he agreed. "I am telling you both, separately and honestly, so that you can decide about each one on its own terms. The territorial stewardship is yours regardless. You do not need to come to the Northern Court to claim your land. I will send the necessary documents and an escort." He met her eyes. "The second thing depends on you." Daisy sat in the other chair and folded her hands and looked at him. This man who had walked into a crowded hall and found her face in the crowd, who had brought her water without being asked, who had stood before every pack in the kingdom and spoken her name into the stone of the hall until it rang. She thought about the year ahead, about the thornwood waiting at the edge of the keep's wall, about everything that had been hidden and was now, finally, in the light. "I have never been to the Northern Court," she said. "I know. I know no one there. You know me," he said. "And Brennan, who will talk to you constantly and whom you will find either delightful or exhausting depending on the day. And Edane, who will not talk to you at all but will ensure that nothing within a considerable distance causes you harm." Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. "That sounds like a court." "It is a good one," he said. And then more quietly, "I will not rush this. I want you to understand that. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I am not asking for a decision tonight. I am asking you to come and allow time to do what time does." Daisy looked at him for a long, honest moment. Then she said, "My mother used to say that the things worth having were the ones you arrived at carefully." She paused. "I think I would like to arrive at this carefully." "Yes," Adrian said. There was something in his voice. The same thing she had seen in that look across the restored Asheville claim. The look that was not ceremonial. Not urgency. Not possession. But the particular steadiness of a man who has decided something and is patient enough to let it grow at its own pace. "Then I will come," she said. She left Thornvale Keep on the 4th morning with Petra beside her, because Petra had announced with complete calm that she was coming, and no one, including Daisy, had found an argument sufficient to prevent it. And Idane riding ahead, and Brennan riding beside them and narrating the passing countryside with cheerful enthusiasm that was either genuinely felt or an extremely convincing performance. Adrian rode at the front of the column. He did not ride beside her. He rode where a king rode, ahead, visible, the point around which everything else oriented. But twice during the long morning's journey through the frost-covered roads that led north, he dropped back to where she rode and asked her something. Once about the thornwood, what she remembered of it from childhood, and once about her mother's embroidery, which Daisy had mentioned in passing during one of the evenings at the keep. He asked with the focused attention he gave everything, and he listened to the answers with the same quality. The second time he dropped back, Petra watched him ride forward again after a few minutes and said to Daisy in a low voice, "He is courting you." "I am aware," Daisy said. "He is doing it very carefully." "Yes." "It is," Petra said with great precision. "Extremely effective." Daisy said nothing, but the corner of her mouth moved in the way it did when she was choosing not to smile and only partially succeeding. The northern court of Caelmore Keep was vast and ancient and smelled of pine resin and cold stone and wood smoke, and it received Daisy with the formal respect owed to a restored heir of a founding bloodline. She was given chambers on the eastern wing, with windows that looked out over the pine forest that stretched to the horizon, and a fire that burned steadily, and a writing table where she began, in the first week, composing the documents that would establish the terms of Thornwood's stewardship. She worked carefully. She had always worked carefully. The months that followed were not simple. There were packlords who questioned the restoration. There were old territorial disputes attached to the Ashvael claim that required patient untangling. There were nights when the weight of an inherited history she had not known she carried felt heavier than one person should hold. On those nights, Petra was there with plain speech and warm tea, and the steady presence of someone who knew you before you knew yourself. And Adrian was there, not always beside her, because he was a king, and a king's time was not his own, but present in the ways that mattered. Present at the council when the first packlord raised his voice against the restoration, and Adrian's single quiet look settled the room without a word being raised in anger. Present on the afternoon, she walked into the Thornwood for the first time, as its rightful heir, and stood among the ancient trees with her hand against the bark of the oldest oak, and when she turned he was standing at the forest's edge, having followed at a distance, close enough to be there, and far enough to let her have the moment. Present on the winter evening, she found a folded piece of cloth on the table in her chambers, good fabric, deep blue, soft, with no note, because he did not need to write a note, and she sat with it in her hands for a long time, understanding that it was the kind of gift a man gives when he is paying attention. Spring came to Caelmore Keep, with green light through the pine branches, and mud on the roads, and the particular aliveness of a world that has survived another winter. On an evening in early spring, in the long corridor outside the great hall, where torches burned in their iron brackets, and the stone smelled of cold and old wood, Adrian stopped walking and turned to her and said, without ceremony and without preamble, because it was not in his nature to approach the important things indirectly, "I would like to speak your name before my court, not as a claimant, as mine." Daisy stood in the torchlight with her golden braid over her shoulder, and her gray eyes level, and her hands still at her sides. She thought of Thornvale Keep, and a claiming hall, and a promise broken in public. She thought of walking out of that hall with her head level, choosing dignity over collapse, moving toward an archway that had led, through a corridor and a small receiving room and 3 days, and a long winter and a spring, to this exact corridor, this exact moment. This man standing before her who had seen her face across a crowded room and had never once looked away with anything less than full attention. She thought of her mother, carefully and quietly, and something settled in her chest like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a long time. "Yes," she said. He took her hand, both hands, one in each of his, the way you hold something you intend to keep. And the torches burned in their brackets, and the stone corridor held the warmth, and the spring came through the window at the corridor's end, and everything that had been hidden was, finally and completely, in the light. The formal declaration was made before the Northern Court on the first clear day of spring, with every packlord in attendance and Master Owain present with his parchments, and Edain standing at the door with the expression of a man who had anticipated this outcome for some time and found it satisfactory. Brennan, standing beside Daisy before the proceedings began, squeezed her hand once and said nothing, which was so unlike him that she understood it was the sincerest thing he knew how to do. The Thornwood territories flourished under Daisy's stewardship. She learned them season by season, walking the old paths her grandmother had walked without knowing she was following them, understanding gradually and then deeply the land that had been waiting in her blood the whole time. Petra remained, establishing herself as the most efficient and least tolerant of nonsense presence in the Northern Court's long history, which everyone agreed was an improvement. Cedric Vane married Lady Rowan Harwick the following autumn. The union was practical and not unkind, and Daisy, hearing of it through a messenger's report to the court, wished them well and meant it. The Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, and the last heir of the Ashvael founding line, were formally bonded before the gathered packs of Ashbourne, on a morning in late spring, when the light came through the thornwood in long golden shafts, and the air smelled of cedar and rain and old stone. Adrian spoke her name before his court and his kingdom with the same quiet, complete authority he brought to everything, and Daisy stood beside him with her head level, and her hands still, and her gray-blue eyes clear, and for the first time in her life, she stood somewhere and felt, not small, not hidden, not waiting, but exactly, precisely, entirely where she was supposed to be. The things worth having, her mother had said, were the ones you arrived at carefully. She had arrived. And the thornwood stood at the edge of the keep's wall, patient and ancient, smelling of everything she had always been, finally home.